everyone. I am here with Ben Lorica from Strata Data Conference from O'Reilly here. Chief Data Scientist, welcome to my show, Ben.
The dedicated show.
The dedicated show, yes. It's a Humans of Data Science and a dedicated show. We can call it whatever you'd like. But so Ben is the Chief Data Scientist at O'Reilly Media. He is also the Program Director of the Strata Data Conference, where we are actually at right now in New York, and also the Artificial Intelligence Conference.
And TensorFlow.
And TensorFlow, look at that.
Yeah.
So I think we can get started with, maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself and what else do you do in...
So my general background is basically, I started out as an academic. I was a professor in applied mathematics and statistics. And then at some point I realized that I wanted to work on more practical things rather than write papers. So at that point, the logical exit strategy, this was kind of before the advent of data science, was to become a quant. So then I joined a hedge fund. And so for about 2.5 years, I worked at this hedge fund building trading models for derivatives. Along the way, I realized I liked technology more, particularly machine learning and programming. And so then I ended up moving to Silicon Valley around the time, basically during the bust, the dot-com bust.
The 09 era?
No, this would be 2000.
Oh, okay, the
yeah,
dot-com bust. I'm thinking financial crisis, sorry.
Bust.
Different crisis.
So then, right after that bust, I worked for a few startups and then eventually ended up at O'Reilly, and then became, in Silicon Valley, part of that cohort that coalesced around the term and job title data scientist. And then at some point, O'Reilly asked me to chair Strata, and then Strata kept adding more and more locations, and then we added the Artificial Intelligence Conference, and then now I'm also chairing TensorFlow World. So at this point I've kind of become more full-time focused on conferences because there's just so many of them now.
So you have a lot of free time then, is that what you're saying?
I have no free time. And then I actually also advise a bunch of startups in both data and AI, and so yeah, I'm pretty swamped.
Yeah. Well, since we're at the Strata conference, let's talk a little bit about the history of the conference and how long has this been going on?
So actually I just checked. So for the New York edition, this is our 9th year. And so in the early days, the conference was called Strata plus Hadoop World because it was basically kind of the merger or combination of two conferences, the Strata conferences that O'Reilly had and the Hadoop World conferences that Cloudera had. So in the early days, Hadoop was a big part of the conference, and over time, obviously, as the technology evolved, Hadoop became less and less important, became less central to the conference, and so now actually the conference itself is called the Strata Data Conference.
Okay, yep, thanks for sharing that. So I know you focus a lot on, talking about trends and machine learning, artificial intelligence. Can you tell the audience what are the top 3 trends around data, machine learning, and AI that you expect to see like in the next year or two?
So first of all, I think that let's see. So there's a lot of automation happening in data and machine learning. So by this I mean, I think people are familiar with the notion of AutoML, which is basically if I bring you data which is ready to build the model from, you can use AutoML tools to automatically build a model and tune the hyperparameters for that model. So that's one form of automation. But I think what's less well appreciated is the fact that automation is happening at different stages of the machine learning pipeline. So for example, there's an open source project from the University of Waterloo Stanford University and University of Wisconsin-Madison called HoloClean, which basically is a tool that uses machine learning to automatically clean and repair data. There's also a new set of tools around data programming, which basically data programming in a nutshell allows you to, in many ways, manufacture training data for your machine learning models. What else? And then there's also tools for managing your data infrastructure that are beginning to use machine learning. So
we have automation in data cleaning, programming, and managing.
And the building of models itself.
Okay.
And then also the monitor, once the model goes to production, people are building tools to make sure that they can automate the monitoring and retraining of these models.
Okay, I'm going to bring this up again when we talk about careers and the future of jobs.
Yes,
data science.
And so, another trend I would say is, I think a trend that I'm interested in is specialized hardware, because we are living in a highly empirical era for machine learning. By that I mean there's still a lot of experimentation and trial and error happening, and so anything that you can do to accelerate experiments, in other words, if an experiment used to take you 2 weeks and now takes you 2 hours, you can imagine you can do a lot, you can try a lot more ideas. And so we're starting to see specialized hardware that hold promise. So Cerebra Systems announced some new hardware at our AI conference in San Jose a few weeks ago. And along those lines, there's also people are realizing as machine learning becomes more important, we probably need tools specifically for machine learning. So it seems like there's 3 buckets of tools. Tools for model development, so managing and tracking experiments, data lineage, and things like that. Tools for model operations, which includes model serving and monitoring and things like this. And then finally, I think a less well understood set of tools revolve around model governance, which includes model catalog, model testing, and things like this. So I think especially in highly regulated industries, model governance will be important, because basically people in financial services or healthcare may have to answer back to regulators, so they need to be able to.
They will have to answer to regulators.
Yeah, so they will need governance tools and processes in place for machine learning.
Yeah, thank you for that. When you talked about the speeding up of the experiments, it reminded me of Dan Brown's book, The Origin. Not sure if you read it.
I only read the Da Vinci Code, because everyone
you should
mentioned
read it. He actually talks about that. It's very interesting. All right, so the next question I had for you was around technology, and which technology you think will require the biggest investments for organizations to make sure that they succeed in this environment.
Which technology? So I don't know if there's, I think everything begins with data. So are you familiar with the ABC technologies that the Chinese use?
No.
AI, Big Data, Cloud.
Okay, ABC's got it.
Yeah. So I think that one of the things that I think that people sometimes don't appreciate enough is that while we talk a lot about AI and analytics, but at the end of the day, everything begins with data. So there are foundational technologies for data, right? Because you need to gather data, process it, assemble it and aggregate it together, clean it, and things like this. So I think I would focus on getting those tools in place, because from there you can build many other interesting things. So for example, we've noticed, along with other studies have noticed as well, that the companies who seem to succeed in AI are the ones that build upon existing analytic success stories. So in other words, they may already have a data warehouse, they append it with some external data sources and start using machine learning, right? And so I think that don't forget about these foundational data technologies, which actually in the machine learning era will require even more specialized solutions. For example, data governance and data lineage will become important in machine learning, right? Because data lineage in particular, if you're running through these experiments and you have a model in production, you want to know where did the data come from that we used to train this model. If something breaks or if the model starts exhibiting weird behavior, where did this data come from? Is this data still available that we can examine? Right? So.
Yeah, and I think for data privacy regulations as well, right? You have to care about where the data came from, how it was collected.
Right, right. And actually, that's a good point, because the other area that I'm interested in is so people talk a lot about responsible AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you've heard of this term. So I kind of frame it in a different way. I talk about it in terms of managing risks. So de-risking AI, so that would include privacy, security, explainability, safety and reliability, and things like this, fairness. And so in the area of privacy, there's a lot of interesting research projects and tools that are coming out for privacy preserving analytics and machine learning. So this includes tools like differential privacy, so you're injecting noise somewhere along the model building process. Homomorphic encryption, so maybe you can build models on encrypted data, or things like federated learning.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I'm going to switch over to careers because I know the audience would care about this for sure, because given the changing landscape that we spoke about, you know, everything is becoming automated, from the data cleaning to the programming to the managing of data. So what do you think are some career options that people should be training for, or some specific skills that they need to be developing at this stage?
To me, so while people talk a lot about data scientists and data science, right? So, because a lot of articles tend to be written about new cool models and things like this. I think to me, it's still data engineering. It still seems to be the more in demand.
Data engineering?
Yeah. I think so, because basically, without data, you can't get started, and also a skilled data engineer can probably build some rudimentary models to get you started, right? So, and now with the advent of AutoML, maybe you need fewer data scientists who can refine and tune models, but maybe machine learning engineers and data engineers can build more of the routine models and take it all the way to production. So I think that, to me, that seems to be more of the promising and more, let me put it, a job where you have more options.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because basically, if I were doing a startup or building a data team from scratch, I want data engineers first before I get a data scientist who just can't do anything until there's data.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, so staying kind of on this topic, if you look across different industries, where do you think there's more opportunity and applicability for this type of work, like data science, machine learning, and AI-related efforts?
So I don't know if there traditionally certain industries adopt data faster, right? So and than other industries, but I don't know. I mean, it really depends on your interest, because in some ways it's probably a good idea for you to work in an industry where you have some interest, right? So if you're not interested in finance or you're not interested in healthcare, maybe it's not a good idea for you to work in those industries. Maybe one way to think about it is if you're thinking about machine learning and AI, you should think about areas where, in specific industries where ML and AI make sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, which means what? So,
like Healthcare, finance.
Or no, just within healthcare and finance, which problems lend themselves to AI and machine learning? So, which would mean what, right? So these should be problems that have enough scale to justify automation, right? So, and then secondly, these are problems where you can actually gather data in order to build some kind of automation solution, right? So, so in the specific areas of AI, so traditionally the resurgence in interest in AI, specifically deep learning, stems from a few areas, right? So two areas essentially, right? So computer vision, so images and video, and speech technologies. So I think that in both areas, specifically computer vision right now is really at the point where there's lots of opportunities to build interesting solutions and products. So if you're interested in a particular industry and you want to leverage some computer vision technology, so ask yourself if computer vision makes sense in that space, right? So speech, I think, is a little more specialized and challenging for a variety of reasons. The first of which is speech platforms are quite complex. There's a lot of parts. But even at a high level, you can see why speech might be complicated, right? So first, even in the best case scenario, where you have the world's best transcription technology, as someone who probably transcribes podcasts and audio, you know that human beings don't speak perfectly.
No.
So there's a lot of cleaning up, even if you perfectly transcribe.
Right.
So natural language understanding for speech applications is different and more complicated.
Yeah.
And then secondly, dialogue flow, right? So how general, how broad the dialogue will your speech application support, right? And what specific domain. And then what are the conditions? Is it indoor, outdoor? Is it in a car? And so on and so forth. And then finally, in an increasingly diverse world, people might speak in multiple languages. They might go back and forth between Chinese and English, or between
Or
English
even accents can
right,
also
exactly.
impact, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, you did. All right, next question is on data-driven companies. So we hear that term thrown around. This company's data-driven, this one's not. What would you say are like success criteria in order for a company to become data-driven? What would they need to have?
Yeah, I think we'll talk about this, I think, too, in AI, right? So, but I think the notion of data-driven company means that not only do you have the technologists and the engineers to build data applications and data products, but you have the end users and the managers who have changed their way of thinking and deciding, right? So because basically now they have to rely on data.
Right.
Maybe now you can't just pull rank and say, this is how we're going to decide things, even in light of data, right?
Right.
So there's a certain amount of education and comfort around the use of data, and maybe also comfort around uncertainty, because a lot of these things probably are statistical estimates, right?
Right.
So there's a certain amount of education that you need to have. So data-driven companies, so there's that. So there's the notion that your workforce has somewhat been retrained in light of the availability of data and data services. But also maybe there's also the successful companies, at least, there's a lot of sharing of best practices, tools, and use cases, right? So particularly important in AI, because that seems to be a challenging thing for many companies who are getting started with AI, is just finding use cases or even maintaining a portfolio of use cases.
Right, that actually brings me to the final question for today. Is there was an article you published, I believe a month ago or so on LinkedIn, called AI and Machine Learning Will Require Retraining Your Entire Organization. So I wanted to ask why the entire organization, and who would you pick, kind of which departments or areas should be retrained first?
So I think you'd have, so the technologists are by default probably need to be understand the technology at some level. But if you think about it, even the decision makers
Yeah.
have to, right? Because they have to know at a high level at least what are some of the strengths and limitations of current AI technologies. Because we're not talking about general AI, we're still talking about narrow AI, which has have limitations. And then as far as actually finding use cases, if you think of AI as automation technologies, you may probably need to also re-educate your workforce so they're kind of understand also the strength and limitations of these technologies, because they are best positioned to understand which tasks and workflows lend themselves to being automated, right? So for example, if you think about, so there's this set of applications called robotic process automation.
RPA,
right?
yep.
So I don't think you really succeed by having someone from the top dictate these are the things we automate.
Right.
It seems to be better from the bottom up, right? So the people in the front lines who know the tasks, who know exactly the steps that might lend themselves to being automated. So that's what I meant in the sense that at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is find a set of use cases and build technologies that people will use, right?
Right.
So the more people are involved in the development of the applications, identification of the use cases, the more likely you'll succeed.
Right, that makes sense. So I guess if the lower level people are empowered by leaders to enable that robotic process automation to happen, it kind of works in the entire organization.
Yeah, they might even start, they'll definitely start identifying use cases that the people on top are not aware of, right? So,
yeah, true. All right, I think that is it for our time, but anything else you want to tell folks about Strata, or when's the next session's coming up?
Oh, so I think just generally, if you want to learn more about the conferences that I co-chair, so the first one is called the Strata Data Conference. So this has become the industry gathering place for people interested in big data, in data science and machine learning. You can find more information at strataconf.com. And then the O'Reilly Artificial Intelligence Conference, which is at daiconf.com. And then there's TensorFlow World, which is a conference which is focused on TensorFlow, a open source machine learning, primarily deep learning library from Google. So you can find more information at tensorflow.world.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time. This has been really interesting. And thank you guys for tuning in. Bye.
Bye.